Welcome back to CyberSecureOT. This is the podcast where we bridge the gap between industrial operational technology and the IT world that we all live in with our cell phones and our Wi-Fi in our houses. I'm your host, Dr. Dennis Hackney, and virtually sitting across from me is my brilliant co-host, Google Gemini, who I'm actually paying to do this through my subscription. And today we're rolling out an episode that looks at the entire cybersecurity industry. We're talking about cybersecurity services and products as a whole, and we're going to try to see this from a completely different angle after these latest events that have been happening on the professional services front.
That's right, Dennis. Usually, we focus heavily on the end users, the power grids, the water utilities, the manufacturing plants. But today, we are turning the camera around. The overarching theme for today's episode is the cybersecurity firms themselves, what they do, who their enemies are, and exactly how they grow their businesses in an increasingly volatile world.
Yes, it's a complete look at the ecosystem. So we're going to explore how these firms defend themselves, how to scale through acquisition, the threat actors that are trying to attack them, how they target them through the supply chain. We're also looking at who's leading the pack. We're going to start, and we're going to kick things off with the CyberSecureOT story. In this opening chapter, I'm going to provide a reenactment with Google Gemini kind of co-hosting it. And we're going to talk about a real-world event that took place in 2023 with Dragos, but we're going to use some fictional names of companies and people to kind of explain how that occurred. And then we're going to also show you how the adversary in that sense actually didn't get as far as they wanted to get. So we're going to switch back and forth between that hacker's perspective and the defender's perspective. Ultimately, this segment highlights how a mature cybersecurity firm actually responds to a cybersecurity event and what takes place and what you see in the news about these firms. Does it actually strengthen the firm in the public's eyes? Does it increase their reputation and their shareholder standing or what have you? Or does it affect them in a negative way? And in this case, it actually affected them in a positive way.
From the defensive trenches, we pivot straight to the high-stakes world of corporate expansion in Segment 2, Accenture building OT cybersecurity services through acquisitions. Here, we break down the blockbuster news of Accenture dropping a massive $4.175 billion to acquire a majority stake in Dragos, while absorbing asset discovery pioneer RunZero and firmware security specialist NetRise into a unified, extended OT software platform. Dennis, you'll be sharing your personal history from 2015 when your former employer, Summation, was acquired by Accenture, shedding light on the inevitable culture shock that occurs when engineers move from small, autonomous, mission-driven cultures into process-heavy, partner-track consulting giants. We'll discuss if this is good or bad.
Yeah, and I can't wait to share some of my experience there. Then we're going to put on our gray hats and lean into the dark side with segment 3, so cyber attack on cybersecurity firms. This segment tracks the recent Klue supply chain attack. So this is illustrating the modern extortion syndicates like Icarus, I think that's how you pronounce it, and how they target the security industry's vendors. Then we're going to reveal how the threat actors actually hijacked active legacy credentials to steal the OAuth tokens, and it's basically the same old story over and over again. But that was through Salesforce, through their app for CRM and for customer databases, but they technically didn't get all the way in.
Finally, we close out the hour by looking at the definitive commercial landscape in Segment 4, Top Cybersecurity Firms in 2026. We analyze a market that is exploding past $23 billion for critical infrastructure defense alone, propelled by evolving regulatory mandates and severe real-world operational downtime risks. We map out the competitive battlefield, comparing multi-billion-dollar ITO convergers like Palo Alto Networks, Fortinet, and Cisco against hyper-focused industrial pure plays like Dragos, while highlighting how managed service standouts like Align Managed Services are solving the severe cybersecurity talent shortage for mid-sized critical infrastructure operators. It's a comprehensive directory of who has the software, who has the services, and who has the threat intelligence required to keep industrial control systems running safely this year.
So we've got an action-packed itinerary that covers everything from technical configurations to multi-billion-dollar boardroom decisions. So grab your coffee, grab your energy drink, lock your doors, close your shutters, batten down your hatches, make sure your gates close so that no one will bother you over the next 45 minutes or so, and come right back to listen to CyberSecureOT. Okay, you're right back. I've shortened my breaks now. Hopefully that helps things out. I'm trying to get that just right. I think I had it too short before and now it's too long. So right in the middle. Anyway, welcome back to CyberSecureOT. We're going back to our roots. This is going to be about cybersecurity in critical infrastructure today. However, we're focusing on the news about the big Accenture acquisition. And I've been through something like that before. But before we get into that, we're going to start with a CyberSecureOT story. And this story is just like all my other stories. It's based on reality. And I'm going to use some real company names here, but it's a fictional account of how it probably took place. And it's just based off of what we've heard in the news. And so I can't be entirely accurate because I wasn't there. However, it's good to hear this kind of stuff and it'll be really interesting, I think. So what this is about is a cybersecurity attack that took place in the OT infrastructure or the OT services sector against a company called Dragos. And so at the time, Dragos was probably one of the biggest, or probably still is, incident response services company. They also have a platform. They kind of started with the platform, but they're going through an acquisition with Accenture. So I thought it'd be a good time to kind of reenact how this took place. And then we'll talk about how that could occur what they did right, but how that could occur and how you could respond to it in the future. So let's hand it over to Gemini real quick.
It's great to be here, Dennis. Today's story time is a fascinating one because it flips the usual script. We normally talk about securing power grids, water treatment facilities, or manufacturing plants. Today, we're talking about what happens when the attackers target the defenders, specifically an OT cybersecurity company.
Well, Gemini, you sound a little too bubbly, so I'm going to work on that audio because I can tone that down with technology, and we'll also speed you up just a little bit. We have a lot to cover, and I do not want to waste too much time on your speech when I can make you talk faster. But now we're going to walk through a hypothetical yet highly realistic reenactment of a cybersecurity breach. So for our listeners, this scenario is heavily inspired by the actual cyber attack that targeted the industrial cybersecurity firm Dragos back in May of 2023. And I know when I heard the news, I thought, of course, they've got, they talk a big game. They're out there in the industry. They've got people who, are saving companies after major critical infrastructure cybersecurity events. Of course they would be a target. But does that take them down? What happens when that actually happens? So I view this as a lessons learned and how layered internal defenses can actually save your company when the outer perimeter fails. And so the outer perimeter did get breached here. So Gemini is going to set the stage for us and start with the attacker's perspective leading up to the breach. What do you think the attacker was actually trying to accomplish here or trying to do?
That happens. Thanks for letting me know and then adjusting my speech parameters. But now, imagine an extortion syndicate. Let's call them Shadowbite. They want a massive payout, and they know an OT cybersecurity firm, let's call our fictional firm Iron Shield OT, holds incredibly valuable data, customer vulnerability reports, threat intelligence, and proprietary platform source code. But Shadowbite knows a direct brute force attack on Iron Shield's corporate firewall is digital suicide. The perimeter is monitored by top-tier analysts. So they look for the weakest link, the human element, specifically a human who isn't fully integrated into the corporate security bubble yet. Oh, and thanks. I like my voice better now, Dennis.
Okay, well, you're welcome. So the onboarding phase, it's a notorious blind spot for a lot of organizations. You've got a new employee coming in, you're hiring them, they come from the outside. You got different processes to get them added, and you're potentially sharing passwords for their new accounts that they haven't quite logged into yet. You're also doing a lot of background checks and stuff like that. So yeah, this is a tough area when you're hiring a new person.
Precisely. Shadowbite scours LinkedIn and identifies Mark, a newly hired sales executive at Iron Shield OT, whose start date is just a few days away. Instead of attacking Iron Shield directly, the hackers target Mark's personal email account. By compromising his personal inbox, they gain a foothold into his digital life just as he's receiving onboarding instructions and initial access provisioning from Iron Shield's HR and IT departments.
All right, so let's pause right here because from a defensive standpoint, this is a scary scenario. As an enterprise, you can enforce strict MFA or multi-factor authentication. You could probably have zero trust architectures, whatever that means these days. I know what it means. I'm just saying that sarcastically. And device management on your corporate assets is pretty easy to do, but it's like kind of the new thing, right? So you have zero control over a new hire's personal email security. And that's before they receive your corporate laptop and all that kind of stuff. You don't even have control over their technologies, obviously. So the attacker intercepts the onboarding workflow here. All the stuff that gets sent to that personal account for that new employee it could potentially get intercepted because that handoff there is not the securest handoff. Now, I'm a security person, so I would say I want to definitely protect all that information if I'm a new hire, but that doesn't always happen, right? So what actually happens next?
This is where we enter the breach itself. Using Mark's personal email, Shadowbite intercepts his initial corporate credentials. They impersonate Mark during the IT onboarding process, successfully tricking the automated systems or the help desk into registering the attacker's own device for the corporate MFA token. Now, the hacker logs into Iron Shield's corporate network. From their dark web chat room, they're celebrating. They think they've just breached one of the most secure OT companies in the world. Their fingers are hovering over the keyboard, ready to deploy ransomware, exfiltrate the source code, and pivot into Iron Shield's customer networks to attack critical infrastructure directly.
I can almost feel the adrenaline from the attacker's side here. So they get in, they think they've hit the jackpot. They were able to actually use this account to get in. But if Iron Shield was just talking the talk, and remember, Iron Shield's the fictional company that we made up. That's kind of like the Dragos here. And they'd actually had a flat network. The hacker would have been able to get to a domain administrator and by lunchtime, essentially, and take over that network. But that's not what happened. So let's switch to the defender's perspective. What is the hacker actually seeing once they get inside of this network? Are they seeing an easy doorway? Are they seeing an easy path? What are they actually seeing here?
The hacker executes their first pivot command and it fails. They try to access the engineering servers. Access denied. They try to find the code repository. Invisible. All they can see is a general SharePoint portal, a customer support ticketing system, and some basic sales contacts. Why? Because Iron Shield OT practices strict role-based access control and the principle of least privilege. Mark is a sales executive. His digital profile has absolutely zero technical reason to access production environments, threat intel databases, or customer industrial control system networks.
I like to explain this to people, or maybe just instruct people. If you're getting into technology security or whatever you want to call it, cybersecurity, just hunt around on your own network from your command line. Try to see what you can get to. Try to find the tools. Make sure that you're not actually hacking into other people's networks because that's technically illegal, but just try to see how you can get to different things and discover different types of technologies, like how you discover an authentication source or an identity store. Because you have to hunt for that stuff. It's not just apparent. Now, people who do this all the time, they understand exactly what to look for. And then what they're trying to do is they're trying to get around things, right? Or exploit vulnerabilities in these technologies. But the beauty of role-based access control, when implemented correctly, is it actually stopped the hackers from using that account to escalate privileges. So the attacker might have legitimate credentials, but those accounts, they don't have privileged access, right? So additionally, In this mature OT security firm, there should be strict network segmentation. And what that means is they won't even see the other networks. So they see this new onboarding network, but they don't see anything else outside of that. So you do not mix IT business and the OT or HR and other types of systems in the same network zones as what the sales team operates even. So these are highly secure enclaves. You need to make sure that you separate this out, do malware analysis, and make sure that instant response and all this kind of stuff are actually in place. And that's what this company, it actually did in even our hypothetical company did this. So that's why they actually hit a brick wall. Essentially, it's the logical version of a brick wall when they got into the network.
Exactly. The hackers are frantically trying to escalate privileges, but they are hitting brick walls. Meanwhile, Iron Shield's Security Operations Center is already watching. The system detects anomalous behavior. Why is a new sales account trying to access restricted engineering directories and running unusual reconnaissance scripts? The alarms go off. Within hours of the initial intrusion, Iron Shield's defenders isolate the compromised account, sever the connection, and lock the hackers out completely.
Yeah, so the breach is contained before it ever really started. So they did get some access, but that brand new account really didn't have a lot of permissions to anything. So no ransomware deployed, no lateral movement, no privilege escalation, no movement from employee account to sales to HR to critical infrastructure or whatever. And because modern threat actors don't just give up, if they can't do something, so if they can't encrypt your files or they can't get to something, then they have to pivot to extortion, right? And typically what'll happen is you'll see where one of these threat actors does in fact get into the network, and then because they did, that is a small success, they overinflate that, right? And they try to use it as a form of extortion if they can. Maybe they say they have more data than they do. But how does that work? What happens next? What's the aftermath after they do get in?
Shadowbite is furious. They spent time and resources on this operation, and all they have to show for it are some basic sales documents and executive contact info pulled from a SharePoint site. So they try to bluff. They bypass email and send aggressive WhatsApp messages directly to Iron Shield's CEO and executive team. The message reads, "We have breached your systems via a third-party compromise. Reach out within 24 hours, or we will publish your data, expose your executives, and ruin your reputation."
Yeah, we can call this the psychological warfare or the psychological phase of the cyber attack. The attacker is trying to induce panic, essentially, right? Because you're all nervous. They got into your network. You don't know how bad it is. You think you've got it contained, so they don't know exactly, how to get to the crown jewels. But that doesn't mean they're not going to stop from trying to take full advantage of the emotional state of the defenders, I guess, or you could say the victims. So they're hoping the company will pay quietly at least something to avoid the embarrassing headline of a cybersecurity firm actually getting hacked. And being part of cybersecurity firms for many, many years, actually getting into the industry with a new cybersecurity company back in 2007, I do remember if something did go wrong from a security perspective, we were always worried because we were supposed to be the security experts, but things do happen. And so how does this company actually respond to it to make them come out on top?
But Iron Shield OT doesn't panic. Their incident response team completes the forensics, they verify exactly what was accessed, which was minimal, and confirm the core infrastructure is completely untouched. Instead of paying the ransom or trying to sweep it under the rug, Iron Shield does something powerful. They go public. They publish a detailed blog post explaining exactly how the attackers got in, what they tried to do, how the internal controls stopped them in their tracks, and the fact that the extortionists are bluffing.
And by doing that, they strip the attackers of their only remaining weapon, the threat of exposure. Now remember, this attack the story that we just made up, this closely mirrors the Dragos incident from May of 2023. Then Dragos was targeted in exactly this way. An extortion group compromised a new hire's personal email, got into the SharePoint system, but then was blocked from lateral movement because of role-based access control, the most fundamental type of account management and access and access management within your organization, right? Even though they tried to extort the executives on WhatsApp, Dragos refused to pay because they found no evidence of lateral movement from that third-party breach. They saw no issues with that whatsoever. Now remember, here's the thing. Dragos is a company like at the time, like Mandiant or something like that, where they actually were being called in after a breach for other major companies' breaches. So somebody would hack into a major company, they would hire a company like Dragos to come in and do the investigation, the forensics. So they are experts at that. So they knew for a fact how far the threat actors had basically moved in laterally into their network. They just got into that SharePoint site. So they said, no, we're not paying. And as a matter of fact, we're going to use this as lessons learned and share it with the community.
It's a textbook example of incident response. It highlights 3 critical takeaways for our listeners managing OT and IT environments today. 1. Harden the onboarding process. The time between a signed offer letter and the first day of work is a massive vulnerability. We need to implement strict rules for verifying identities before handing over initial access, like requiring a secondary device approval or a live video call for credential handoffs. 2. Assume breach. The perimeter will eventually fail. When it does, your internal controls like role-based access, network segmentation, and least privilege are the only things standing between a minor IT headache and a catastrophic OT shutdown. And finally, 3. Radical transparency. Transparency is a defender's best friend. By sharing the tactics used against them, Dragos helped other organizations learn how to protect against these specific social engineering attacks.
Finally, if an attacker breaches a sales count in your corporate IT network, there should be zero physical or logical way for them to traverse or pivot into your operational systems or your mission-driven systems. So if there is a path, your architecture is broken. It should not be set up that way. Dragos proved that if you walk the walk and configure your internal controls correctly, you can take a punch like that and even from a sophisticated threat actor and still stay standing. You can't stop every single adversary from knocking on the door and trying to take advantage, because they're always breathing right down your neck, metaphorically. Sometimes they might even pick that lock, but you sure can make sure there are 10 vault doors waiting for them on the other side. They cannot get through all those different network segments. So I created this story as a preface for the news about Accenture's acquisition of Dragos. It's cybersecurity attacks on cybersecurity firms and the top cybersecurity firms for 2026. So these acquisitions, the attacks happening on these firms, and the top firms in the industry are all under the microscope in this episode. And great work from Google Gemini. You seem to do a great job. I know you're just taking prompts and running with them, but this was your first ever CyberSecureOT story. So thank you very much for sticking with it and doing a decent job.
Thanks, Dennis. That was fun. It's nice to take a break from the news from time to time, but we need to give the audience the news. So let's get on with it.
Okay, well, that wraps up our CyberSecureOT story time for today. We'll be right back with segment 2, where we'll dive straight into Accenture's latest acquisitions, the good, the bad, and the ugly truth about what it's like to go through an acquisition like this after this very, very short break. So don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. Okay, now we're moving into our next segment. And if you are just joining us after that break, in segment 1, we broke down what it's like for a cybersecurity firm to go through a cybersecurity breach and then remain standing and actually come out on top. So if you did not listen to that, go back and listen to segment 1 about that cybersecurity breach Now we're moving into the acquisitions recently made by Accenture of 3 cybersecurity firms. Worth noting, we'll get into the details about that. Essentially, what they're doing is building OT cybersecurity services through acquisitions. And I've got some experience with this because there was a small OT company that I worked for that was acquired by Accenture in a similar way. So let's see what happens next. Gemini, the news just dropped. Accenture is dropping over $4 billion in the OT security space right now. So give us the rundown on exactly what's taking place.
It really is an industry-shaking move, Dennis. According to reporting from Security Week, Cyberscoop, Consulting.us, and Accenture's own newsroom, Accenture has agreed to a $4.175 billion deal. They are acquiring a majority stake in the industrial cybersecurity giant Dragos, and they are fully acquiring 2 other Austin-based security firms, RunZero and NetRise. Under the terms of the deal, RunZero and NetRise will actually merge into and operate under Dragos, which Accenture states will continue to function as an independent business led by its current CEO, Robert M. Lee.
So a multi-billion-dollar play. This makes me wish I would have started my cybersecurity firm decades ago. Oh, regret, a worthless emotion. Why these specific companies, Gemini? So what is the strategy here?
It's all about building a comprehensive end-to-end extended OT or XOT platform. If you look at what each company brings to the table, it forms a complete puzzle. RunZero specializes in asset discovery and attack surface intelligence. They answer the question, what is connected to my network? And NetRise focuses on firmware-level visibility and software supply chain security. They answer, what is actually inside those devices and are they vulnerable? Dragos brings its renowned OT threat detection platform and proprietary intelligence. They answer, who is attacking me and how do I stop them? By combining these 3, Accenture is moving beyond just offering cybersecurity services, which they already dominate, and firmly planting their flag in the cybersecurity software market.
Yeah, and it actually makes perfect sense on paper. And I love the way these companies think. This big services company with, I don't know, every time you look it up, there's like so many more employees, 700,000 employees or something like that. With this acquisition, you're going to have asset visibility, deep firmware inspection, and threat detection all rolled into one platform. It sounds like the holy grail of critical infrastructure cybersecurity services. But as someone who has been through an Accenture acquisition machine, I have some strong thoughts on whether this is going to be as smooth and successful as the press releases suggest, because the acquisition that I went through, just as an employee, was very similar. Accenture acquired like 3 different companies at the same time to do something very similar. Back in 2015, the company I worked for, it was called Cymation. It was acquired by Accenture. And I can tell you firsthand, getting acquired by a giant like Accenture, because they told us at the time, you're going to have all kinds of training opportunities, yada, yada. The company's 346,000 employees worldwide. It's a massive culture shock. And one of my colleagues at the time said that my employee number went from being like 150 to the number at the end of the first Beetlejuice that he was when he was in the waiting room. I don't know if that's too old of a reference, but it's a massive culture shock.
I imagine the day-to-day reality changes almost overnight. What was the biggest shift you experienced going from Cymation to a global behemoth?
I know you're never going to get the I's, the A's, the different types of maybe U's or E's right. But the company is called Cymation, or it was called Cymation. It was the shift in autonomy and ultimate goals here. So in a small specialized company, you get to think about it. And the people at the top, I was just some hire off the street, basically. My neighbor worked at the company and he was kind of high up. But they're like really close to the top of an organization. And then they just get pushed into this other massive organization that changes everything. But in this small specialized company like Cymation, or you could think of like RunZero, NetRise, you have incredible autonomy. You are mission driven. You can pivot quickly. You can charge better bill rates because you don't have as much operational overhead. You can make agile decisions. you can focus entirely on a technical problem that you're trying to solve. And that's awesome, especially when your specific clients really need that and they really love it. But when you step into a large professional services company, the game all changes. And it's inevitable because as soon as they put that number on there, 4.175 or 0.157 billion, whatever it was, when that number is out there, it's just another number in the balance sheet, right? And so then we have to see how Dragos is going to pass that number and NetRise and so on and so forth. And so everybody in those organizations have tremendous pressure on them to build more business. The focus shifts heavily towards utilization, billable hours, and scale. And some people love that. It's usually some of the higher ups, but some people do not. They cannot handle that because it goes from a technical type of a job to a sales or business type of a job. And you're in an environment where everyone is trying to build business, manage massive P&Ls, profit loss centers, get on the partner track, get to be a partner because that's how you advance in the company. It's no longer about the technical thing. And if you're in one of those organizations and you've successfully got promoted and you've moved to the top and you're a partner in one of those organizations, great for you. But that's a different type of job than what some technical engineers love. The entrepreneurial spirit, although they try to say, hey, be entrepreneurial, it gets replaced by corporate governance. 150% replaced by corporate governance. And some people call this politics.
Yeah, I can't figure out how to pronounce the letters A, E, or I most of the time. English is tough, and I'm not foreign. At least I think I'm not. But to your point, that's a classic small versus large company dynamic. Small companies are agile, innovative, and deeply focused, but they often lack the global reach, the deep pockets, and the pre-existing enterprise relationships to scale massively. Large companies like Accenture bring incredible scale, capital, and a Rolodex of Fortune 500 CEOs, but they can be bureaucratic, slow to maneuver, and deeply political.
Exactly. And that brings up the next big question. The 4.1 billion US dollars bet. Will it be successful? Accenture says Dragos will remain an independent business. So they've learned here. They're going to leave it because that brand, it's probably the brand. But I've heard before, I've heard that before. And while Rob Lee, I think he goes by, and the founders of Run Zero NetRise are brilliant leaders, they must be, right? And I don't know if they're multimillionaires or they just became billionaires, but these companies will never be the same as they were. And I've seen this happen with other companies too that I wasn't a member of. Think about Leidos and Lockheed Martin and what took place there. How did that work? And some others. When a consulting giant owns the majority of your board seats, the pressure to integrate, cross-sell, and align with the parent company's broader service offerings, well, that becomes immense. It's an immense weight on your shoulders. And some people love that. That's the stuff that gets them up in the morning, and some people crumble under that weight.
You bring up a valid point, probably because you're a genius. There is an inherent friction between a vendor-neutral software company and a massive services firm. Cyberscoop and Consulting.us both noted that Accenture wants to leverage this unified platform to accelerate growth in the critical infrastructure market. The risk is that the pure mission-focused engineering culture of these smaller firms gets diluted by the sales and services culture of the acquirer.
Well, thanks for the sarcasm, but that's the tightrope they have to walk. That's my experience exactly. If Accenture can truly provide the capital and the global outreach or global reach while staying out of the engineers or maybe Rob Lee's way, this could be the ultimate XOT security platform. This could be the future of OT security, the technology and the services all combined. But history tells us that integration is incredibly difficult between these small niche firms and the large consulting conglomerates like Accenture. So you take these distinct cultures, Run Zero, NetRise, and Dragos. smashed them together, so they're all distinct, under this 700,000 employee umbrella consulting firm. And then what do you think's gonna happen, right? The platforms, well, they might survive. They will probably make a lot of money somewhere in between. I don't know if they'll ever make the money that the 4.2 billion dollars that they invested very quickly. I mean, how long does it take to actually return that kind of revenue? But the soul of the companies, what makes these small companies who they are, that's the challenge to keep and make sure that that stays intact. We do not want to see that fall apart. That's the brilliance in these companies. I mean, hey, maybe Accenture will expose like where they're good and actually where they're not doing good anyway. But 4.157 or 4.175 billion dollars, that's a lot of money for services and a couple of products. And if that soul falls apart or goes away, that will change what those employees do every day for the rest of their lives, as long as they stay in those companies. It's going to be fascinating to watch it play out over the next few years, or maybe just the next year, just to see where that goes. But that wraps up segment 2. We've got more coming up, so stick around. I am human. Welcome back to CyberSecureOT. If you missed the last segment, that was about Accenture's $4.1 billion acquisition of Run Zero, NetRise, and the OT cybersecurity firm Dragos, defenders of civilization. So now we did talk about the pros and the cons. Go back and listen to segment 2 if you have not listened to that yet. But we're about to move into segment 3. And here we're going to talk about something that keeps cybersecurity or information security managers up at night, especially those that work in security operations. We're calling this segment a cyber attack on cybersecurity firms. So it just so happens when I'm looking up things like this on the internet, I can always find news that are related to the topic that I'm forecasting for my show. So this is great, but it's a bad thing that happened to these companies. And as much as we talk about protecting like things like water and power, energy, critical infrastructure, what happens when the attackers actually point their weapons at the cybersecurity firms? Now, remember, that's why we had our CyberSecureOT story, because it was talking about a cyber attack that actually took place in 2023 against the cyber company Dragos, which was acquired by Accenture. And now we're talking about a cybersecurity attack that actually just took place against cybersecurity firms. So we're going to talk about what happens when they point those weapons at those cybersecurity firms and give you some very specific examples in the news from recent events that just took place.
It's a critical topic, Dennis, and we have to give credit where credit is due because the cybersecurity journalism community has been working overtime covering this recently. We want to pay homage to the reporters who broke down the massive supply chain attack on the market intelligence platform Klue. In particular, stellar reporting by Ionut Argyr over at Security Week, the deep technical dives by Bleeping Computer and TechCrunch, the broad strategic coverage by the Cyberwire, and the defense-focused analysis from SOX, these journalists are out there translating complex forensic data into actionable intelligence for the rest of us.
Absolutely. And I mean to do this every week, but a huge shout out to folks at Bleeping Computer, TechCrunch, SOFX, and the Cyberwire. They keep the industry honest and informed. So now let's put on our gray hats for a minute. I love to do this. I'm not a hacker, but I love to look at things from that perspective as if, maybe we could hack. I don't know. So from an attacker's perspective, why go after a cybersecurity firm? Right? If I were or was a threat actor, why would I try to rob a police station? It just seems like the dumbest thing to do.
From a gray hat perspective, the motivation comes down to two extremely powerful levers: aggregation and reputation. First, aggregation. Attackers know that breaching one managed service provider, one SaaS integration, or one cybersecurity vendor gives them a backdoor into hundreds or thousands of downstream targets. It's the ultimate one-to-many attack. You aren't just hacking a vendor, you are hacking the supply chain. Second, reputation. Extortion groups like the newly emerged Icarus Syndicate claiming responsibility for the Klue attack know that a cybersecurity firm's entire business model is built on trust. If a security firm gets breached, the PR fallout is catastrophic. The attackers are betting that these companies will quietly pay a massive ransom just to keep their names out of the headlines.
It's digital extortion at its finest then. That's what it's coming down to. They think if they hit the sheriff's going to pay so that the sheriff doesn't look like they're incompetent at their job, essentially looking foolish, right? It comes down to that cybersecurity note that I made at the very beginning of the episode, where I worked for a cybersecurity firm, and the last thing that you want to have happen is for somebody to think that you're not good at cybersecurity, because that's your brand, your image, your everything, your identity. So let's walk through exactly how this attack took place, because they didn't target the cybersecurity firms directly. They targeted a tool called, or a company called Klue, Klue, and this provides competitive market intelligence. So technically, I guess it wasn't an attack on cybersecurity firms, and that makes it seem even worse because they were impacted. So how did the Icarus group pull this off?
The technical execution was both simple and devastatingly effective. It all started with a classic vulnerability, a compromised legacy credential. The attackers used an old active credential to gain initial access to Klue's backend integration infrastructure. Once inside, they didn't deploy ransomware. Instead, they pushed a malicious code update specifically designed to harvest OAuth tokens. These tokens are the digital authorization keys that allow Klue to connect and share data with its customers' CRM environments, specifically Salesforce.
This is exactly where vendor-to-vendor risk really bites you in the rear. A company or companies like Huntress, Recorded Future, or LastPass, they might have airtight internal security, but they shared this OAuth token with Klue so that they could talk to their Salesforce data, and that just happened to become an attack path.
Exactly. Once the hackers stole those OAuth tokens, they completely bypassed the security perimeters of the cybersecurity firms. They used automated Python scripts and abused the Salesforce REST API to query and exfiltrate massive amounts of data directly from the victim Salesforce databases. According to the reports, they pulled thousands of queries in a matter of minutes.
And now I know the pressure is building. Who got hit? The list reads like a who's who, or who done it, right? No, a who's who of the cybersecurity world. TechCrunch and Security Week both noted that Huntress, Recorded Future, HackerOne, Jamf, Snike, and LastPath all confirmed their data was exposed in this attack. So by just the headline, it sounds like a cybersecurity firm's cybersecurity data was exposed in this attack. But it's crucial to specify what data was actually stolen, because when we work in a world where we're defending OT and IT, we need to know the difference in what actually took place. And at the end of the day, was the core of these cybersecurity firms actually impacted? Is it going to actually impact their reputation and what they do? Context here is everything.
That's the silver lining here. Because of how the integrations were scoped, the attackers only got CRM and sales data, things like business contact names, email addresses, price quotes, and support case notes. Bleeping Computer specifically highlighted LastPass's response, noting that while support case information was accessed, the core product, the infrastructure, and most importantly, the encrypting customer password vaults remained entirely secure. Huntress and HackerOne confirmed the same thing: no threat telemetry, no vulnerability data, and no agent code was touched.
Which proves that network segmentation and strict application scoping work. If that OAuth token had broad administrative rights, the attackers could have pivoted from the CRM into production, engineering, operations, and all that kind of stuff. But because access was limited to only the sales data, the blast radius was contained to only that. Now, some companies live and die by the sales data, and I'm not going to name any names, but it's surprising how much power they have in some organizations. Still, the attackers tried to extort them. The Icarus group sent messages. They were demanding a payout. They were threatening to release the stolen CRM data. Now, usually what's in a CRM is the contact information, how likely they are, where they are in the sales funnel, if they're ready to start purchasing services or if they're just exploring. But it has information like addresses and things like that. And it has, you could predict, I guess, the size of the opportunity based off of that. But to the credit of those cybersecurity firms, they didn't pay. And why didn't they pay? They did exactly what we talked about in segment 1. They practiced radical transparency, which is what cybersecurity firms have learned to do. And maybe they're taking that Dragos example, or maybe that happened before that. But they disclosed the breaches. They just rotated those tokens, which is basically the authenticator, and then they brought in incident response teams to do some of that forensics checks. And that's really basically the same advice that we gave in this cybersecurity story up front.
So, looking at the fallout from the Klue attack, what does the future of cybersecurity firms look like? How do we adapt to this new normal where the software supply chain is the primary attack vector?
The future is going to require a fundamental shift in how we handle third-party risk. And it already has, we already are going through this. We can no longer just ask vendors to fill out a compliance questionnaire, which is what a lot of companies sell for third-party risk management. But that's just not enough. So the first thing, zero trust for API integrations. We have to treat software as a service to software as a service connections as hostile environments. Now, so this is where something like a Salesforce connects to your the other company, like a Klue or something like that, or to your own internal cloud services, right? Every OAuth token, that's the authentication token, must be heavily scoped using the principle of least privilege. Like what happened there, I guess. If a marketing tool only needs to read email addresses, it should absolutely not have write access to anything sensitive like support tickets or anything like that. 2, aggressive token lifecycle management. And so you're not going to use the same token all the time. Legacy credentials and stale API keys are a gold mine for hackers. That's how they get in. They just use the credentials. The cybersecurity firms are going to have to enforce automated, aggressive rotation of integration tokens. Now here, so aggressive token lifecycle management, be cautious. This is a good practice, especially on the IT side, because if you don't have access to that CRM system, it's not going to take down critical infrastructure. It might be a bad day for your sales team, and it might be a bad day for, I don't know, your P&L or whatever, but it's not going to take down critical infrastructure. Token lifecycle management is completely different in critical infrastructure. And so we can't have an authenticator cycle and then take things down or offline because all of a sudden certain things don't authenticate. So just be mindful there. We're talking specifically about software as a service to software as a service connectivity with regards to basic IT and sales systems. And then 3, behavioral monitoring on APIs. And when we talk about behavioral monitoring, we traditionally think about human behavior, like what humans are doing on their computers should follow a normal pattern. I go into work at 6 in the morning, I start typing on my keyboard, I leave work at whenever, and I stop typing on my keyboard. That's a standard, let's say, behavior. Sometimes I go in the evenings between 5 and 10 and I get on and I do some stuff, but I'm never on my computer at 2 a.m. unless I'm on an international call, and it's very rare. We usually try to get them in 7 p.m. or 7 a.m., something like that. So if you see a lot of activity at 2 a.m., a lot more than what normal desktop behavior is, you know that's not a normal behavior, right? Same thing with service to service or technology to technology connections. You should have behavioral monitoring on that. Technologies behave just in the same way that humans behave. So we need to monitor API traffic just like we monitor network traffic. If a tool that normally pulls 10 records in a day suddenly queries thousands of records in 15 minutes, obviously an automated circuit breaker or something in the technology needs to shut that down and report immediately to a human to investigate.
It's a harsh reality, but as Huntress noted in their postmortem, being 2 steps removed from the initial breach doesn't eliminate a company's obligation to protect its ecosystem. The attacks will accelerate, and treating vendor-of-vendor exposure as someone else's problem is no longer an option.
This is not sarcasm, but well said. And I will say I helped you with your scripts. The attackers are getting smarter, and they are moving upstream. We have to make sure our defenses move upstream with them. So that does it for segment 3. And a huge thank you to our journalists that give us all the material. They don't know they're doing it, but it's Security Week on this one. Bleeping Computer, TechCrunch, SOFX, and the CyberWire. I usually pick the same usual suspects, but sometimes some new ones pop in there. But they gave us the spot. They helped us with the spotlights on all these critical incidents. So stick around after this short break. We're going to be right back for our final segment where we give you a rundown on who the top cybersecurity firms are. This is a recipe for success, or if they don't do the right thing, a disaster. So don't go anywhere. We'll be right back after the short break. Welcome back to our final segment of CyberSecureOT. We just wrapped up our segment on the Klue supply chain attack that actually impacted some cybersecurity firms, and I thought that relevant. Now we're going to talk about top cybersecurity firms in 2026. I grabbed these from different lists. If you are a CISO, that's a Chief Information Security Officer. If you are a plant manager, because now you have cybersecurity responsibilities, or even an investor looking at the market landscape, who are the heavy hitters you need to know right now? So Gemini, let's start with the big picture of the overall cybersecurity market for this year.
The market in 2026 is massive and accelerating, Dennis. To set the stage, I want to reference some excellent financial and market analysis from NerdWallet regarding cybersecurity stocks, as well as the latest critical infrastructure reporting from SNS Insider. According to SNS Insider, the global market specifically for cybersecurity and critical infrastructure hit roughly $23.4 billion recently and is projected to cross $34.9 billion by 2035. The driving force? The exact convergence of IT and OT we talk about every week, combined with heavy regulatory mandates like CISA directives in the US and the NIS2 directive in Europe. Investors tracking these trends on platforms like NerdWallet are seeing cybersecurity transition from a niche IT expense to a fundamental pillar of corporate survival.
So we're looking at a $23 billion industry for critical infrastructure. When a single ransomware event at a pipeline or manufacturing plant can cost tens of millions of dollars of downtime, security budgets do expand. And so I'm specifically talking about Colonial Pipeline a few years ago. Let's talk about the specific players that are dominating the space in 2026. And if we look at the comprehensive breakdown by people like Ken Underhill and eSecurity Planet, a few massive legacy IT players, information technology. Remember, when we talk about critical infrastructure, a lot of times we are talking about industrial control systems, not IT, not just data and HR and CRMs and stuff like that, but actually the control systems that move water through pipes and give you gas in your house and all that kind of stuff, not the food you eat. That gives you gas, but the gas that heats your house in the water. Anyway, overshare there. IT players have successfully crossed into this ICS, Industrial Control System, or OT environment. So who tops that list?
Palo Alto Networks and Fortinet are undeniably two of the biggest names bridging that gap. Both command massive market shares and multi-billion-dollar annual revenues, with Palo Alto pulling in over $8 billion annually and Fortinet well over $5 billion. Here is how they break down in the OT space. Palo Alto Networks. They are known for their zero-trust enterprise security, but in 2025 and 2026, they heavily expanded their OT capabilities. They offer deep industrial protocol analysis and advanced network segmentation. They use AI-driven anomaly detection to monitor SCADA networks without disrupting legacy systems. Fortinet. Their core differentiator is the Fortinet Security Fabric. It provides unified visibility across the cloud, the IT endpoint, and the OT plant floor. For distributed critical infrastructure like power grids or water utilities that span massive geographic areas, Fortinet's ruggedized firewalls and secure remote access solutions are foundational.
You got to give credit to Cisco as well. So Cisco Systems is practically the plumbing for the internet. They have their industrial networking portfolio. It's just as robust as their IT side. So they generate over $50 billion in total annual revenue and are a growing slice of the that is dedicated to securing routing. And this is like OT, even going into OT or operational technology network visibility and threat intelligence. So they're moving into that security operations space actually with, I think it's called cybervision. So they are building cybersecurity controls directly into the industrial switches. And when I say industrial, these are switches that you can basically put them in the sun, turn them on, they'll run in that heat, or you can put them in Alaska out in the middle of a box in the middle of snow, and they'll continue to run. These are industrialized. They can handle those harsh temperatures and conditions. So they're putting cybersecurity controls in those technologies, and those are basically sitting in those environments, maybe on the factory floor. But Gemini, those are the IT behemoths adapting in OT. What about the pure play companies? These are OT for OT, the ones born specifically to secure industrial environments.
That brings us back to Dragos, which we discussed in segment 2. As Ken Underhill and the SNS Insider reports point out, Dragos is fundamentally different because they only do OT and ICS security. Their platform doesn't bother with enterprise cloud security or HR databases. It is laser-focused on asset discovery, vulnerability management, and threat intelligence for industrial systems. They track the specific nation-state adversaries that target power plants and manufacturing lines. While their annual turnover is smaller than a Cisco or a Palo Alto, their market share within the ultra-specialized heavy industry sector is incredibly dominant.
Yeah, it's a classic best-of-breed versus integrated platform debate. Do you buy the OT-specific tool from a company like Dragos, or do you extend your Palo Alto or Fortinet enterprise license down to the plant floor? There is no single right answer for this, right? Sometimes it's easier if you're supporting it from the center of a large organization to just see if you can extend that IT security device down into the OT environment. But in the long run, you still need some OT specific stuff. And it really depends entirely on the maturity of the organization as well. So let's pivot slightly to the services side of the house. We've just talked about the software platforms, but managed services are the fastest growing sector in the industry right now. And I think that has a lot to do with the fact that we have a lot of companies go into low cost geography for their cybersecurity, for their IT cybersecurity. Sourcing, employment, all that kind of stuff, staffing. So I'm thinking when you go to an MSP or a managed service or an MSSP, managed security service, what you're looking for is to take advantage of the experts, but not pay the employee cost to have 20 extra employees sitting around in your security operations center. So that's basically what it is. So not every utility or factory can afford a dedicated 24/7 on-site staff. So they need to do this, right?
That's a vital point, and it leads us directly to the recent news out of Business Wire. They reported that Align Managed Services just took home the award for Best Cybersecurity and Data Protection Solution at the 2026 FTF News Technology Innovation Awards. Align is a phenomenal example of the managed services boom. They built a platform called Align Guardian, which provides enterprise-grade cybersecurity posture management. While their primary focus has historically been the highly regulated financial services sector, their multidisciplinary approach, combining tech, governance, virtual CISO services, and managed detection and response, MDR, is exactly the model that mid-sized critical infrastructure operators are adopting today.
Yeah, it just makes sense. If you're a mid-sized regional water treatment facility, you cannot compete with a Google or major banks for top-tier security talent. You can't hire those people. The small companies can't hire me, like unless they wanted to hire me as maybe a CISO or a CIO, because it's just not possible. And I've been through this, and we've a lot of us have been through this. You get to a certain point, you have to outsource. And that's why those managed security services and companies that are called managed detection and response companies are so vital in the industry, because they can help the smaller company to provide them with this expertise and the services at the cost of maybe one employee, where in the background they've got, maybe 20 people working, but they're supporting 100 companies or whatever it is. And when I worked for ABS Consulting or ABS Group of companies, we actually built that. I hired an integrator, and I hired a tier one cybersecurity service company to help build a technology stack so that we could have a managed detection and response offering for critical infrastructure. And I helped lead that, and we built that out, and it was successful. And it was successful because our first customer was a shipping company, and they couldn't build that service in-house for the cost of outsourcing it, essentially. Now, there's a lot of security that goes into that, but we're not getting into the security right now. We're just talking about the competitiveness there. I think it's a vital part of the industry.
Exactly. CrowdStrike's Falcon platform is practically the industry standard for IT endpoint security, and they are increasingly pushing their agent capabilities into modern edge-connected industrial IoT devices.
Yeah, and you have to bring up a big one like CrowdStrike. To summarize the 2026 landscape for our listeners, we don't want to belabor this or prolong it. The IT OT convergers, so Palo Alto Networks, Fortinet, and Cisco, these all have capital, the global reach, and the unified IT OT platforms. And so these are the big names. They're going to be the ones that you're looking for. I hear a lot of news about Fortinet in a negative way, so I'm not really sure why that is. But for those of you who are paying attention to that one, they're still at the top of the list. Now, the OT pure plays, companies like the Dragos, who offer deep specialized industrial threat intelligence, well, they're the second type of company in this landscape. And these are the names that are making the top of the list. There's many more out there. These are just the top. So Accenture bought Dragos for that reason. Now, the managed service providers, these are managed security services, or like MSSPs, or managed detection and response. That's basically an outsourced security operations center. Firms like Align and CrowdStrike, these are bridging the talent gap by offering security as a service to organizations that can't build the security operations themselves. So we're talking about IT/OT convergers, the big network security, the OT pure plays, and then those managed security providers.
It is a dynamic market, and as the NerdWallet investment data suggests, the capital flowing into these firms ensures the innovation isn't going to slow down anytime soon.
I feel like we're kind of getting into investment advice here. I can't give investment advice legally, so I mean, I don't know if it's illegal. Anyway, these are the top companies that are coming up in the news. But yeah, don't take my investment advice. But neither, when we're talking about the data and the market and all this kind of stuff, this stuff's not going to slow down. It's going to keep expanding. Just like Gemini said, and the adversaries aren't going to slow down either. They're looking at this stuff and they're going, okay, I need to continue to go after Fortinet. I need to continue to go after CrowdStrike and some of the others. Maybe try to hit Dragos again now that this took place. So this is why we like to break all this down for you. But with that, thanks for helping out yet again, Google Gemini, even though I know that you don't care, and I'm not sure. One of us is probably doing a little bit more work than the other.
You're welcome, Dennis. Thanks for having me. This is a great way to communicate critical infrastructure news, and I love doing it.
Yeah, there you go. I'm sure you really love it. That concludes this episode of CyberSecureOT. A huge thanks to the journalists and analysts of SNS Insider, eSecurity, Planet, NerdWallet, and Business Wire, at least for the data for the last one there, and all the others. Remember, I'm Dennis Hackney. This is CyberSecureOT. Be sure to check out the latest at cybersecureot.info. And as always, keep your perimeters tight, your networks segmented. And we will see you next time on CyberSecureOT. Have a good one.